You are listening to the One Day at a Time podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, if you're new here, my name is Arlena and I'll be your host. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at Arlena Allen. So drop by, say hi. I would love to meet you. In this episode, I have a conversation with Caroline Beidler, the co-author of You Are Not Your Trauma, Uproot Unhealthy Patterns, Heal the Family Tree. Trauma is such an important topic because so many of us in recovery from addiction are living with unhealed trauma. It affects our sense of self-worth, the people we surround ourselves with, and even our ability to get or stay sober. Caroline and I talk about her story of abandonment, growing up with dysfunctional parents, surviving multiple sexual assaults, and her own addictions. We actually recorded this episode prior to the one that we did with her mother, Diana Dallas, who is the co-author of the book, but I was so moved by that conversation that I published that one first. So yeah, there's no real master plan. I'm literally flying by the seat of my pants. Caroline's story is one of trauma, but ultimately she is also a living example of how far you can go when there is willingness to do the work of recovery. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Caroline. Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really just grateful to be here.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, no, it's been nice to, we've been sort of going back and forth, and it's nice to be able to get to spend some time with you today. We were just chatting before we hit record, and you have a lot of things going. I'm excited about your book that's going to be coming out. You and your mom are going to come back for a second interview. We'll talk to the two of you together. So super excited about that. I think it'd be so great. Like, we don't often hear from the moms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is so brave. Like, I'm really excited that that you're going to be able to come on, both of you, and we'll put her on the hot seat too.
Oh, she's gonna love that. Well, I don't know about that. She was with me through years and years, decades of active addiction. So she's definitely been on the hot seat. But it's
Yeah.
really fun to be able to now be on the other side of that and to share
Yeah.
recovery with her.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Before we jump in, I like to play a little game called the lightning round, which is actually kind of slow, but we'll front load the episode with some resources. When you first got sober, was there a book that was particularly helpful to you?
Wow, this is decades ago. So when I was 19, into my 40s now, just for some context, 19, I found the book Drinking a Love Story by
Mm.
Caroline Knapp. And I just remember it was the first kind of quit lit before even quit lit was a thing. The first book that I read from a woman who talked openly about her struggles with addiction. And for her, it was alcoholism. And she also talked about some struggles with disordered eating. And it was just so eye-opening for me to realize at that point in my life that I wasn't alone. And I think that was the first time. And so books have always been really powerful and impactful for me throughout my life, even as a child. And so to be able to connect with a book about recovery was a really beautiful thing, so memorable. And thank you for asking that because I haven't thought about that book in a really long time.
Yeah, no, that one actually comes up a lot, even
Mm,
now. Like, I think she's passed away. I don't remember how long ago, but
mm,
people were mentioning it so often. I was like dying to get her on the podcast. But yeah, what a beautiful legacy she left behind.
mm.
I
Just
love that.
incredible. Yeah, and I think it really speaks to the power of stories. I think
Hmm.
sometimes, especially now in our day and age, it's like, do people even read anymore? I mean, we like things quick and fast and, snappy, but books are powerful and that continues. I mean, we're impacted all the time by authors who pour their heart and soul into stories for us. And as you know, as an author too, it's a lot of work. It's not just sitting down and writing a book. It's so much work. But we do
Yeah.
it because we care and then we have that passion and want to share that story. And I'm so grateful that Caroline Knapp did, years ago.
Yeah. She did an amazing job. Yeah, super
Mhm.
powerful. Looking back over your recovery, how long have you been sober? It sounds like a long time.
13 years and counting. I think I'm
Ooh, lucky
nearing 13
13.
and a half. I know. Woo-hoo. So I don't know. Every year it's like, I'm always so grateful to celebrate another year in recovery. And at the same time, it's like, wow, okay, now I've had my entire 30s have been sober. And now I'm moving into my, it's like, woo, here we go.
Yeah.
Midlife recovery. But I'm loving it.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing midlife without, sobriety. Because
Oh, oh
listen,
no, it's
oh my gosh.
miserable.
Yeah, wait till you hit menopause.
Hey,
Super
I
fun.
I can see it and I'm feeling like there's like tremors. It's like before the earthquake. I'm like
Yeah,
feeling the
yeah.
tremors are starting. That's
Yeah, you
another
could.
conversation.
Geez, that is another conversation, but it's so funny how like there is so much talk about it now online about
Mhm,
like what it's like to be a woman sort of entering that phase. And I
mhm,
think it's, and sobriety is a big part of that because alcohol is so disruptive to our hormones and all that stuff. So
mhm.
I'm glad that that's part of the conversation now. But if you were looking back over the 13 years you've been sober, do you see like a reoccurring theme or like a quote that has meant a lot to you, or maybe like a mantra, something that you continue to come back to?
Mm. That's a really tough question because I think
I know.
there's so many really powerful ideas and I think one of the main things, and maybe this is just in my mind recently because, my next book is coming out in September, but one of the things I didn't realize for a really long time, even into early recovery, was how much my past trauma symptoms were impacting my present. So the unhealthy patterns, things like boundary issues, people pleasing. I was in like train wrecks of relationships for years, even in recovery, and just not understanding how much some of what I had been through as a child and young adult impacted how I was living my life and how I was living my recovery. And so being able to understand that we can move through some of those challenges and we can heal. And so, long introduction for my quote, which is healing is a choice. I feel like I keep coming back to, we can choose to break free from those unhealthy patterns. We can choose to decide not to live maybe what our parents have lived. I'll be talking to my mom soon. She's significant or gone through some really significant challenges like I have in terms of trauma and sexual violence, and the list goes on. And so being able to make the decision, we have the agency, we have the choice to say, we're not going to live like this. I'm going to interrupt the cycle of trauma in my family, and I'm going to interrupt the cycle of addiction, for my children. So that healing is a choice. I love to talk about it because I want to share that message with other, especially young women. I wish I would have heard that earlier on. I wish I would have known, like, I don't have to be in this place of having no agency and no control over my life. I can choose. So, anyways, that's a really kind of impactful idea that I've been thinking a lot about and that has kind of followed me through the past, I'd say, decade or so in recovery.
No, that's beautiful. It almost answers my next question, which is, but I wonder if you have another idea around what you wish you would have known when you first got sober. Like, was there one thing that, in addition to what you just said, because that feels like an answer to that question too. But is
Mhm.
there, like in the beginning, is there something you wish you would have known right from the start?
Well, it reminds me, so when I was in inpatient treatment for the first time, I was 17 years old, and there was a counselor there. His name was Richard, and I will never forget Richard. He's probably long gone, by now, but he was an older gentleman, and I remember sitting in his office, and I don't remember leading up to the point in the conversation. I think I was probably talking about my struggles and what I was going through, and he looked at me and looked me in the eyes and asked me if I knew if my life had value and purpose. He asked me if I knew that. And at that point in time, I didn't know that. And he reaffirmed and said again, like, your life has value and purpose. Your life has value and purpose. And I think that was the first time I had ever heard that. And, my parents probably loved me in such a way to kind of share that in many ways with me, but I never remember hearing that and really letting that sink into my heart and understand that that was true about my life, that it had value and purpose. It didn't matter that I had lived through horrible drug addiction, even by the time I was 17, or multiple sexual assaults. You know, my life, regardless of what I had been through, even up to that point at 17 as a young woman, had value and purpose. And I just, I long to speak that into the lives of other women today. We were talking a little bit earlier on about those moments when we're sharing with people we're mentoring or coaching or working with our friends, and the moment when the light comes on, it's like, oh, that moment of understanding. And yeah, I wish I would have known that even before 17. And that's part of kind of why I moved to do the things that I do today in recovery advocacy and being an author and even being a mom. It's like, I want to share that message with other people, because when we can internalize that our lives have value and purpose, we can do incredible things in the world. We can help people and we can make the world a little bit better. It sounds kind of cliche. I feel like a Beatles song needs to be coming on in the background, but like we can make a positive impact.
Yeah, no, I mean, like that's really like our mission. We're trying to make the world a
Mhm.
better place. We're trying to
Mhm.
help others. We're trying to end that needless suffering that we
Mm.
experience, kind of end it sooner for others. So no, that's beautiful. When you think about your self-care practice,
Mhm.
do you have like what does that look like for you? Is it daily? Is it weekly? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I've really come into this place of finding a really great rhythm for this stage of my life. And so my answer today would have been a lot different than 10 years ago before I was married and had children. Like single lady in recovery self-care me was like all in. I had all the time to do all that. But now as a mom, my kids are five. I have 5-year-old twins. And,
Oh my
in
goodness, I
this
didn't know
stage,
that.
oh yeah, another blessing of recovery.
Yeah.
Double blessing. But my self-care routine looks a lot different because my time is not my own as much, right? So moms out there can
Yeah.
get this and feel this. So my morning devotion time looks like 5 minutes where I have a book right now. It's an amazing devotional that I'd love to give your listeners some ideas for morning readings, but I won't do that now.
Oh,
But I have,
give me your favorite one.
is it right here? Oh my gosh, where is it? She Recovers
Oh,
Every Day. I love
yeah.
that.
I'm in
I
that
have a
one.
little book. It's readings from faith practices, and right now I'm reading one by Henry Nouwen, who's one of my favorite authors. But, anyways,
Nice.
I have all sorts of them. Streams in the Desert. That's another really good one. So I take that 5 minutes, and I've set I basically told myself no phone. Morning wake up. You can just take a brief. Boop. I'm going to look at it for a minute, away, phone gone. I have 5 minutes to like set my morning. I am not going to do that looking at social media. So I do my morning reading really quick, and then we jump into our morning time. And then once everyone's out of the house, I work from home. I have some time to do some prayer meditation and then also move my body. So exercise for me is as important as that 5 minutes of, and it sounds awful. I hope at some point there'll be more minutes for my little morning reading, but um, being able to move my body is just so grounding and centering. And I think especially, as someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and things like that, my mental health needs me to move. My body needs to move itself. And so whether that's, we used to be jogging. That's changed now. I'm like the power walker out there. Power walking, stretching. I love low impact, weights and things like that. Like little weights, 5 pound, 10 pound weights. So moving has to be a part of my day. Very important to me. And then throughout the day, I like to jump on a Zoom meeting if I can. Whether it's I like women specific Zoom meetings. I don't practice a particular recovery pathway at the moment. Like I started out really heavily into 12-step fellowship. But that's really evolved over time, and I love that. I go to church, and so our church here in Eastern Tennessee started a recovery ministry, which has been beautiful. I just went last night. We have a speaker meeting on Wednesdays, and it's really awesome to connect with other folks in recovery who might be on a different recovery pathway. Folks may not be as familiar with 12 step, and that's okay. So definitely meetings, movement, having that quiet time and devotional time, and checking in. I have folks that I check in with and tell them myself, like, hey, I'm feeling funky. Even the other day, I was like in super isolation mode. Even after a decade plus in recovery, I was like, no, I don't want to no, I don't want to see it. No, I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to, I want to stay in my sweatpants. I don't want to go out into the world and like be a functioning human being. And then I tell someone that, like, hey, this is what's going on in my head. Because if I don't, then I know sometimes that's when those voices can kind of come back. Addiction likes to sit and wait for us to be in those vulnerable moments. So that's a little glimpse of some of the things that I do.
A little glimpse. Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, it's so funny because I have always thought of myself as like, oh, I'm like this easygoing girl. I'm not high maintenance. And then I get sober and I'm like, oh, I'm totally high maintenance. It's not like nails and hair and it's maintenance as far as prayer, meditation, feeding my brain something like a daily devotional, connecting with others, and so I have found that like that all the things that you mentioned totally works for me too. I love incorporating all that stuff. It sounds like a lot at first, but isn't it interesting how it kind of becomes like second nature? Like it doesn't require a lot of effort, except for like when you want to isolate and you kind of have to stretch a little to connect with others. But
No, I totally agree. And it's interesting if we think about the amount of time and energy we put into our active addiction, and that's like that was so much more maintenance. Like I feel like this is maybe like this is the easier, softer way, as they say. Like
for sure.
It's good. It feels good. It feels right. And I'm so grateful because those stressful days of trying to get high and it's just like, oh, I no, thank you. I do not
No,
want to go
thank
back to
you.
that. No, thank
Somebody
you.
was telling me like, oh man, but I don't want to go to meetings. Like they're so boring. It's like, it's not comfortable. And I'm like, how comfortable is a hangover?
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like
Not at all.
I'm asking you to sit in a room for an hour,
Mm,
right? Or do a little morning routine that takes an hour or half an hour, like
mm,
way easier than a full day of like hangover or whatever.
mm,
So it's all little baby mindset shifts.
Oh, I
But
love that.
let's talk about how we got here. You've mentioned some things that are pretty, I mean, impactful, right? Having experienced assault multiple times, drug addiction. Um, and I want to get to that, but I always like to start off with like family of origin stuff. I feel like childhood kind of sets the stage for everything else. So, can you tell me a little bit
Mhm.
about what your childhood was like?
Yeah. So it's interesting when I'm asked that question because my dad actually recently passed away in last
Oh,
September.
I'm
And
sorry.
so it's interesting to kind of reflect back on some of those earlier years. And when you lose a parent, as I'm kind of getting into that stage, it's like my parents were aging and now I've lost a parent, reflecting back on childhood. But today I can see both of my parents, so all three, I have a stepmother as well, as human beings who have their own stories and who've experienced their own traumas. And so I hold a lot more compassion today for my parents' stories and for the way that I was raised. But, I was raised in an alcoholic home. And so being an adult child of an alcoholic today, it's interesting. I'm learning more about that at this stage of my recovery. But growing up in an alcoholic home, having that instability, my mom, and she'll be on to talk about this in a little bit with you at another time, but she had really significant mental health challenges from some of her own trauma that she experienced. And so, she left when I was about 2, and having the instability of the alcoholic home, mom's gone, and then mom is, dating all these people and getting married multiple times, and just like I just felt like I didn't have a safe place to land. Like there was no stability, there was no feeling safe or comfortable or at home in my home or in my body, and then as I got older, experiencing what many women do, not just, the assault that happened, the first one at 14, but some of those like microaggressions that started happening, objectification. I remember when I was 12, and it was like all of a sudden all these old guys started looking at me and I was like, what's going on? Like what I just remember feeling so uncomfortable in my body, in myself. And that just it continued, and I didn't have the support and I didn't have the, I guess, knowledge and self-awareness to know that I could ask for help. I just felt so isolated and alone in some of those experiences. So it wasn't surprising that, at 11, I was like experimenting with alcohol, and then things really just kind of spun out of control from there.
So 11 was the first time you experimented?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember my grandpa, really helped raise my brother and I, and he would keep a 6 pack of beer in his fridge for my dad when he would come pick us up. And so I remember grabbing a can of beer and going out in his yard, under this beautiful big oak tree, cracking this can. And I think now, like, what an 11-year-old child looks like. I'm like, I
I
can't imagine if someone
know.
would see, this like little 11-year-old girl, drinking a beer. But that was what I learned. Like when you're struggling, when you're lonely, when you're tired, when you're angsty, like you drink, you do something to take that pain away. When we're celebrating, when we're happy, when there's good things going on, we celebrate, we drink, to accentuate that. It was always this adding on. And so I just started like looking outside of myself for whatever I could find to change the way that I was feeling. When I was feeling lonely or unsafe, alcohol, then marijuana, then, just whatever I could get my hands on, at least for a little while, seemed to kind of dull some of those feelings. But as we know with addiction, that the monster comes out quickly, with the realities of some of the things that we then experience. And it quit working very quickly for me.
Yeah. When did you start experimenting with drugs?
I think was it around 14 or so, and then I was full blown, addicted to cocaine by 15, and that really led to a very, I don't even know how to say it, downward spiral, I guess is what, we can say. It was just like, wow, that it was like really fast from zero. But, and I hear
Yeah.
people say, I've heard this said in meetings too. It's like you take that one drink or line or whatever it is. And it's like, I felt instantly like, ah, okay, like this is it. I've found the solution for what's going to work with me for me to get through life. And at 15, it was cocaine. Well, that doesn't last very long when you're, and then of course, being a young woman, and I was just getting involved in like all of this like drug culture that was just really dangerous and scary. And looking back, I mean, I should probably still be in prison for some of the things I was just kind of there for, that the people around me were doing.
Yeah.
And I was just completely oblivious as I was just feeding my addiction.
Yeah. I mean, listen, cocaine is really expensive, so I can only imagine what you had to do to get your needs met. I
Mm.
don't, what were some of the ways you got, did you have a job? Did you?
No. No job. So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I won't get into too
I
many
was afraid to
details, but
ask you because it
I
sounds
know I could
like,
tell you were like, oh, how do I ask this
how
question?
do I ask this question? Because it could be really loaded. Share as much or as little as you want about how you were. Because my husband, he got sober because of cocaine, and he got sober by the time he was 18. And it was like, where did you even get it? Because like like, girls have other ways to make money, but like I was like, how did you get? And he had friends that were wealthy that were just
Mm,
like supplying him, and like just people he knew. I don't know, just like random people. But
mhm,
I mean that the search for the drugs, I think, is what lands a lot of people in jail, like stealing and armed robbery or
mhm.
other
Yeah,
things.
and thankfully I wasn't like that's not a part of my story, although I, very near to being incarcerated at several points along the way. But for me, it was really about kind of just attaching myself to primarily men in relationships who were either basically dealing drugs. And so just kind of getting involved in that culture. And looking back now, I see how taken advantage of I was. I mean, having, people would have me hold large amounts of whatever, and we would go, to take it where I was like, oh my gosh, I could have been, you know, arrested for that. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking. But the interesting was like that was the thing. I wasn't thinking. And as an adolescent who's using substances, now, as a researcher in addiction and recovery, and I do a lot of writing for federal agencies and different things, like I know now more about the neuroscience of what happens to the adolescent
Yeah.
brain when we're using substances. And oh my gosh, it is a miracle that I'm sitting here today. It's a miracle because of how I disrupted like the natural way that we grow as human beings. And as a child, replacing some of what what our brains do, which is create dopamine. I'm putting on my like, you're like, who is this person? This is my social scientist person coming out, my researcher person. But when we use substances over and over and repeatedly, especially as young people, it changes the way our brain creates dopamine and functions. And so when I went to treatment for the first time at 17, it was like I just remember the feeling when I couldn't have those drugs anymore, of just feeling like completely like a train had hit me, just physically just wrecked, and emotionally, mentally so depressed. Just it was horrible. But I
Mm.
learned and started to learn in addiction treatment, and now certainly looking back is like, wow, what my brain was going through. I mean, it had to relearn how to feel good. It had to
Yeah.
relearn how to create that dopamine. And so when I'm working with women today in early recovery, I try to remind folks like, hang on, wait. People say, wait till the miracle happens. Wait till your body starts healing, because it does. And it will. Like our bodies are so resilient. So I'm so grateful I've been able to jump back from some of those years of, I mean, I talk about it. It sounds like some like after school special, like some dramatic, that person, that girl is so far removed from who I am today. And I've done so much healing that it's awesome.
No, we really have. And it's amazing I mean, the situations that we put ourselves in during those times. And it's like there's a reason why drugs are illegal, right? It's like it totally affects your brain. Your brain doesn't even stop developing until you're like 25. So,
Mhm.
I did the same thing. I started at 14 and was flooding my
Mhm.
system with all kinds of chemicals, and it
Mhm.
affected the way my brain developed. But you make such a good point about like the early period is a period of healing and like relearning. Your brain is
Mhm.
rewiring and it
Mhm.
gets better. That's the
Mhm.
message. It gets way better, a million times better.
I just want to say too, I think it's important to note just some of the privilege that we carry, depending on, who we are, how we've grown up, and things like that. Because I've talked to so many people that likely or have not had the same experience as me of being able to dodge those bullets,
Yeah.
being able to just be able to walk away from getting pulled over, or not having, so being able to acknowledge like, wow, I've been really privileged, not only in not getting caught for a lot of the stuff that I did as a youth, but also in my access to treatment, my access, I was able to go to treatment at 17. I didn't go to juvenile detention. I went to treatment, and my parents were able to help support that because they had insurance. And so I think it's important to think about too when we're telling our stories, like some of those moments in time that are supported because of who we are, because of the privilege that we have.
What triggered that choice between treatment or an institution?
Well, so, my parents, like I said, it was challenging growing up, but at the same time, there was a lot of love. And I remember my dad, I was living in this, I hadn't even graduated high school, and I was living in this rundown apartment. My parents, I was lying and doing anything I could to use, to drink, to go out. And they were just kind of fed up. And so I moved out of the house and was in this apartment, this rundown apartment. And my dad came to pick me up, and he was going to take me to go get groceries and take me out to lunch. And I remember when he saw me, and we hadn't seen each other for a couple weeks, and I can't even imagine what I looked like. He just started tearing up. And I know, and I was so tired. I was just so tired of the lifestyle. I was tired of just being around all of it. And I was tired of using, I was tired of feeling the way that I was feeling. I just wanted to be done, but I didn't know how to be done. And my dad offered and basically said, we want you to go to treatment. We really want you to go to addiction treatment. And if you don't, we don't really know what else to do. That he had brought up foster care. I was like, I'm going to graduate high school soon. I don't want to, go into foster care. And so I was gently pushed to go to treatment. And I'm so grateful for that because I don't know if I would have survived, that summer.
Yeah. What do you think your father saw that made him tear up like that?
Well, there's actually a picture of us of that day, and I don't know who took the picture because I only remember it being him and I there. But I was just really washed out. My skin was washed out. I was probably really I mean, I got to a point in my using, I just got really puffy. You lose a bunch of weight and then you kind of just your body is just, it was just toxins. My hair was, I don't know if you remember this in the late 90s, just it wasn't bleach blonde, but it was like yellow blonde. It was like the yellowest of yellow, like
We didn't know about
peroxide.
purple toner.
Oh no, there was not. No, speaking of, I kind of need some toner. Looking a little yellowy, but no, this is like yellow and yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
It was a whole thing. It was a whole look.
That was my hair when I first got sober too.
Was it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh goodness. So yeah, I can only imagine what he saw, but I'm grateful that he was there to pick me up that day, and to make that suggestion.
How were you in an apartment at 17? Did they pay for you to be in an apartment?
Honestly, I don't even really remember. He must have. It was two older girls who had graduated high school, and it was kind of like they wanted me just out for a while to figure out, what are we going to do with Caroline. And yeah, that was tough.
They couldn't have you in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's rough, man. I have friends who have teenagers and I, hear the stories and it's just so hard to have somebody in active addiction living with you. And it seems like the youngins, man, they're just wild. I can only imagine, how my parents must have felt too. It's just very hard did you feel resentful to them that you weren't able to live, or was it a relief that you weren't living with them?
I think I was just glad I could be out and doing what I wanted and not have to lie. I could just, use all day. But I just remember this feeling of helplessness too, because I was so reliant on, I didn't have a job, but I needed to use and, all this stuff. Like we know, I'm sure your listeners,
Brutal.
many of folks can relate to that. It's just this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, just, rock bottom.
It's exhausting. So you go to treatment, and what was your experience of treatment?
Well, at 17, it was what it was. And I remember, like I shared that story about my counselor, Richard. I think it was the first time I started really internalizing some of these thoughts and feelings of, wow, my life doesn't have to be like how I've been living it. Yeah. My life can be different. And one of the exercises they had us do, it's so interesting. I can still remember I can remember these pieces. And this one of the exercises they had us do is we had a piece of paper on one side of the piece of paper, we wrote a list of what are all the actions you're taking today? What is everything you're doing today? And, list it out, using, lying, whatever it is, good things, bad things. And then on the other side of the paper, write a list of where do you want to be? Like, what are your goals? Like, what do you want from your life? And when we got done writing those things out, they had us kind of compare the two sides. And basically the gist of the exercise and the purpose was to help us see that, what we were doing in active addiction was not going to get us where we wanted to be. And I think it almost sounds common sense, now, but at the time it was just like this light bulb. It was like, oh my gosh, I have these goals for my life. There are things I want to do. And I think sometimes, when we think about young people who are struggling with addiction today, talking about the dangers of drugs and fentanyl, which definitely we need to do because it's horrible.
So scary.
Yeah, super scary. But, focusing on the dangers and this and that, it's all well and good. But are we also talking about and helping young people decide or figure out like what they want to do, what their purpose is, what are your goals? I almost hate that now people are, with New Year's, I know this is way far away from New Year's, but a lot of people are kind of like anti-resolutions, like I'm not going to do that. Because they don't last and because of this and that. And it's like, well, wait, what about like good old fashioned goals? Like, what is wrong with
Yeah.
setting a goal and be like, no, this is what I want for my life. And I remember at that point saying, I want to be a writer. I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be an author. I want to be a writer. I want to help people. I want to fall in love. I want to be in a good relationship. I just, there are these things that I wanted for my life. Well, guess what? I am living on that side of the list. That is where I'm living today. It almost like I'm giving myself goosebumps. That's where I am today. But it took a
Yeah.
lot of decades to get there. And unfortunately, there's a lot of folks struggling out there who do not know that there's another side to the story. They don't
Right.
have to live the way that they've been living anymore. We don't have, and those of us in recovery, we don't have to go back.
Right.
Um, you know, so.
No, that's really good. Tell me a little bit about your recovery process. You mentioned that you did 12-step for some time. Was that
Mhm.
introduced to you by the treatment center?
I believe I went to a meeting with them. Again, it's kind of patchy. I like remember the exercises,
Yeah.
but I don't remember. Did I go to a
The
meeting? I
timelines are
think
always fuzzy.
I
Yeah.
know. I think I may have gone to a meeting, but interestingly, it took me till I was 28 before I was going to a church at the time, and someone, an older woman there, I kind of came to her and said, "Look, I'm really struggling with alcohol." And I had gone since 17, so 17 to 28, there's a span of time there.
Mhm.
I was in and like trying to be recovery, trying to use, trying to not use, replacing, marijuana with alcohol, like doing the whole men, of course, is another addiction. But doing that whole like jumping around thing. Um, no program, no meetings, no community, right? I was Caroline doing it herself, feeling like she had to figure out her own way. But it just got to a point at 28, I was like, this is not working for me anymore. And this woman, her name was Vera, and she said, have you thought about AA? And I was like, no, no. I connect with
Mhm.
other people in recovery. No, I haven't thought about that. And I went to a young person's meeting, and I remember walking
Smart.
in. Yeah, I remember
That's really
walking
smart.
in. Yeah, and I was terrified, and at the same time, I remember looking into the room, and I instantly felt like this room, even though everyone looks different than me, I felt at home. Like, it was one of the first
Mhm.
times I felt at home, and I just felt this, like, little glimpse of feeling safety, like, in my body. It's like, I feel like this could be the beginning of something. And,
Yeah.
I did that recovery pathway, and I still do sometimes, for quite a while, had sponsors and things like that, and, really helped introduce me to the recovery lifestyle and give me a
Yeah.
really strong foundation in it.
What was you went through all the steps and did the inventory and amends and all that. What
Mhm.
was if you kind of, can you encapsulate like the transformation? Like, what was it like on the other side of that?
Well, I've been through the steps several times with a couple different folks, and I
Yeah.
think the steps for me, it's such a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And before I was even in 12-step recovery, I remember almost kind of organically going through this process of like understanding some of my character defects, looking at my part, wanting to make amends to people. And then when I became a part of, I learned more about 12-step, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's a plan. I'm an organized person, type A personality. I'm like, there are steps. That's 1 through 12. This is great. I can just follow this, right? It's a magic formula. It's not magic, but you know what? There is something very spiritual,
Yeah.
and
Feels like magic.
right, and mystical about what happens within the 12 steps. And so I think one of the biggest parts of that process for me, certainly doing, inventory, step 4, but getting to a place of being able to forgive, not like other
Mm,
people for what they had done to me, because I had a lot of hurt done to me, but forgiving myself,
yeah.
forgiving myself for, um, not valuing myself, for allowing certain, unhealthy people, behaviors, some of those things where I just carried so much guilt for how I had acted and how I had really treated my body and my spirit with harm.
Yeah.
And I think when I got to a place of really making amends with myself, it was like a turning point for me to
Oof,
be able to kind of move through some of those other steps.
that's really powerful. I mean, I feel like letting go of the guilt and shame reveals who we really are. Like
Mm,
that is the work. It's
mhm,
letting go of everything that isn't really true or ours, or
mm,
the behavior patterns. Like when we let all that stuff go, all that's left is who we really are,
mm,
which is good. I feel like everybody at their essence is actually really good.
mm.
So thank you for encapsulating. That was beautifully put. And so I'm so curious because this book that we're going to talk about your book with your mom and stuff, but it's You Are Not Your Trauma. And I feel like trauma is really, for most people, the root cause of the addiction in the first place. So,
Mm,
what are
mm.
some of the modalities to heal? What kind of treatments do you use to sort of mitigate that trauma?
Yeah, so, well, I don't want to give too much of the book away. But what it does, that's a great question. What the book does is it goes through a series of 5 rhythms that are really meant to help guide us along kind of this movement towards healing from some of our trauma. I'll talk about one of those because again, you'll have to pick up the book and pre-order the book, which the pre-order link is coming soon. Now Marketer Me is coming out. But one of the main things, and I shared this with kind of this self-forgiveness piece, but really coming to a place of understanding how we treat ourselves, how we treat our bodies is going to impact our mental health, our emotional health, and our spiritual health. And so some of the practical kind of strategies that I outline in the book relate to boundaries. There's a whole section on boundaries and kind of how setting some of those really helpful boundaries around kind of protecting our bodies. So for me, and this is me kind of letting go of some of the shame of this. I had a lot of harm done to me by men, but I also did a lot of harm and I was in a lot of unhealthy relationships. And for those who watch Sex in the City, I'm talking like, I want to say Samantha. I don't know if you know Samantha numbers
We
versus
all know
Carrie
Samantha.
numbers versus, right? I won't say where I fell on the spectrum, but like I'm there. Okay. If that kind of gives you a little bit of a picture, it was just a lot of men, a lot of yuck, a lot of mess, a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And I'm not proud of that. And but I talk a lot in the book, and my mother does too about her experience. But what I learned through coming to a place of like letting some of that shame go,
Hmm.
and also learning that I can set a boundary. I can say no. And part of why I allowed all of that into my life and all of those people and just all of that mess was because I didn't feel like I had agency or the choice to do that. It was like, oh, someone new came along who was super unhealthy. Oh, you just got your 5th DUI. You were perfect for me. Like, you like me? Okay. I'm not going to say no. Like, let's go hang out. Let's have a couple drinks. And it was just like this. I mean, zero boundaries. I talk in the book about just feeling like there was no outline, there was nothing kind of protecting myself,
Yeah.
so I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but I think
Not at
when
all.
we can learn some of these practical ways, like I can set a boundary by being assertive, and what does that look like? So I talk a little bit more about that. I can set a boundary by, I share that list, where we can kind of write out what we're doing now, where we want to be. What are some boundaries that I need to set in the middle of that list to make sure I can get to where I want to be, where I'm living in a full and whole and healed life? So, we are not our trauma. And that is something that I've been able to learn in recovery, and I'm still learning. I'm a lifelong learner, but being able to come to that place of not identifying with my trauma, living in those trauma symptoms has been so freeing. And honestly, I cannot wait to share this book with the world in a couple months. And yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, no, it's so exciting to hear, what it's like on the other side, right? It's like
Mhm.
there's tools, there's strategies, there's practices, there's different kinds of therapy to heal these
Mhm.
kinds of trauma, but there's so much of it that's within our control, right?
Mhm.
So much of it that can be done. Like I know therapy is expensive, so it's important. Like your book's going to be important for people who need to spend a lot of time with themselves. Like we can't really spend hours and hours with therapists, day in and day out.
Mhm.
So it's important that we are learn how to develop some self-care skills as opposed to living in those survival skills that
Mhm.
feel so comfortable, but that are so destructive to us. Tell me a little bit about what life is like now.
Oh, it's so great. It's wonderful. It's not always perfect, and I still have bad days like I shared earlier. I mean, I just went through this day of just feeling I don't know, I was like really mopey and I didn't want to go to a meeting and I didn't want to do this. And I just wanted to kind of, stay in my sweatpants and watch Netflix and get a pint of Ben and Jerry's cookie dough ice cream. But I forced myself to go out, and I felt so much better after doing that and making some
Yeah.
healthier choices. But, even though I have those days that aren't great today, I have amazing things in my life that are most definitely the product of recovery and the choices that I make every day to stay on the pathway of recovery, and to prioritize and choose healing. I'm married to an incredible man. He is he wears a button-up shirt every day to work, which I just kind of like laugh to myself sometimes, like, oh my gosh, I married one of those guys. Wow, I never thought that was possible. Just but it's incredible what we invite into our lives when we have set those boundaries and those standards for ourselves. And
Yeah.
I remember I met Matt, my husband, and it was like the week before that I had just kind of like given it all to God. I'm like in my going on late 30s, not married, no kids, really wanting that life, but I didn't have it. And I just was like, okay, God, I'm done. I don't know, if I'm going to be single my whole life, but all I know is I am not going to lower my standards. Like, this is what I want for my life. And if it's not, if it's not for me, then I guess I'm not. And literally it was like a week later, he comes knocking on my door. And so it's been a journey ever since. But
They say
we
to surrender to win.
right, exactly. Ding ding ding. I won jackpot.
Yeah.
But we met and it was like a year later he proposed, then a year later we were married, and 6 weeks
Wow.
after our wedding day, I found out I was pregnant. And then found out it was twins. So it was like,
Oh
oh my
my
gosh.
gosh.
So very, very incredible. And I start with that because I mean, my family is everything to me. And
Yeah.
especially growing up in a house where it because of what some folks, my parents and others were going through, it was like I felt so alone. It's really
Hmm.
important for me to show up for both my husband and my kids today
Yeah.
and prioritize, not just my recovery, but my recovery so that I can show up as a mom. And that's the best gift
Ooh.
that I've ever received. And
Yeah.
I want to hold that and cherish and honor that gift always. But the other amazing part is, I get to write books. Like I said, on my list when I was 17, even when I was a little girl, I would sit and write story. I mean, I've always just dreamt of being an author. And some days I wake up and I'm like, oh, my second book's coming. I actually have a third one that I've, been shopping around, looking for an agent. And it's like, wow, this dream of this purpose that I had for my life and this vision for my life, I'm living that life.
Yeah.
And it's pretty powerful and also very humbling because I know at the same time, like where we started our talk today, telling you some of those really gritty stories of going through active addiction, I need to maintain my recovery. I do not want to go back to that place. And I need to always be reminded and keep in the forefront of my mind that I'm not, not that I'm like one drink or drug away from that life. And maybe I am, but I still need to maintain my recovery and do those things that have led me here every
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't want to go back. I don't want to find out if a drink or a drug really will take me back there. People have told me it will. So I don't want to do that research. Other people have done that research for me, and I'm going to trust what they say. So, but yeah, I'm so grateful today. Life is beautiful,
Yeah.
and I get to talk to people like you, which is so fun.
Yay. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I always like to end with, what life is like on the other side of that, because that's really the brass ring, right? It's like, what are we
Mm-hmm.
doing all this for? It's so that we can realize our dreams, which is totally possible. So it's
Mm-hmm.
nice to have somebody that is living proof that you can go through all that grit and still come out shiny on the other end.
Oh, I like that.
Yay.
Shiny,
You
yes.
shiny, you're shiny people. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to, get your book and talk to you and your mom. And congratulations on a second book with a third one, already in your line of sight. That's amazing. Congratulations on that. So that's a lot of work, and thank you so much for all the work that you do. It's really incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate opportunities like this to just highlight recovery and that, like you said,
Yeah.
it is possible and we need to keep celebrating that.
Amen to that, sister. Well, listen, I'll look forward to talking to you and your mom real soon.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
One last thing before you go, you can follow the podcast on Instagram for daily inspiration at ODAT Podcast. And if you'd like to get a biweekly email from me with recommendations to books I'm reading, meditations I love, or other recovery podcasts, just sign up for it at odatchat.com. That's ODAAT chat.com. And if you do, I hope you enjoy it.